I live and breathe in the metrics and seeing what metrics are improving performance. And we can tell from a metrics perspective, if I had more time, who is likely to fail before they actually fail. That's going to sound very Amazonian, actually, but for me, it's customers first, and I come from a background that I believe a number of sales operation professionals have been as well. So I carried my own book many a moon ago, and I have been a sales manager as well, and then I have a consulting background as well. So for me, sort of sales operations and revenue operations tied in very well with my background. And I think coming from consulting, you're always selling as well, and it's figuring out what the customer needs. I find selling best if you don't try and shove something down somebody's throat, but you actually stop, listen, and say, hey, what do these guys need? And it's the same thing in sales operations. It's what do the investors need? What does the board of director needs? All the way down to the salespeople, what do they need to become more effective and to sell more? And typically, the board of directors. My company I work for now, Kaseya, is private equity owned. We're owned by two of the big private equity firms, and a lot of firms that have effective sales operations. Teams are private equity or venture capital owned because they want to provide more data to the customer. But at the end of the day, the data is hopefully showing how you're selling more and better of the right things. And so down to the salespeople then is they may care about what they are selling or how much they're selling. But mostly they want to be able to be selling more effectively. So the customers vary throughout the organization. So I think my background has taught me to put the customer first, to figure out what the differences between the in my case internal customers are, and how to provide what they need to do their job better, and ultimately what I need to provide to from a state of the art sales and revenue operations team.
Yeah, fantastic. And I like the description of this as selling. One of the ways you describe yourself, something I particularly liked, is that you're a change agent, and change does require selling. You're absolutely correct. But cultural change is one of the hardest things often to facilitate. And I'd love to dig into more detail into how you view that issue, problem, and overcome it too.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the business school answer is, there's a book called "Who Moved My Cheese," but it's cultural change is something near and dear to my heart. I was born in Sweden. I went to high school in Portugal. I came to college in the U.S. in the mid '90s, and then I moved back to Europe to get my MBA, and then came back to the US. And within the US, I've lived in probably about 10 different states. So, and the US is such a big country. It's just like all of the EU. There's big cultural changes between living in New York and now down in Florida. I lived in Nevada for a bit, and everything is different. So I'm lucky because I have a bag of tricks to see what has made me adapt better. And I work with that with our sales team as we're onboarding new people. So Kaseya is very much a factory. We have over 35,000 customers. We have 25 products to sell. And we have very much a land and expand strategy. And most of our salespeople are young. So they're 26 is about our average age or median age. And we don't have very many tenured salespeople that you might see in enterprise sales that have been selling things for 10, 15 years. They're the subject matter expert. They have their book of business, etc. Our account managers have their book of business, but it's much more of a transactional sales. So some of our accounts, they may know the customers inside and out, and they're multi-threaded, et cetera. But there is a bit of a culture change coming to Kaseya. We're heavy on the metrics. And my job is to make the transition, or one of my jobs is to make that transition as smooth as possible. And that is making the tools that we have available to the sales teams as effective and self-explanatory as possible. And I think that the culture changes within companies and between companies tend to happen when people come in from abroad and don't feel a sense of belonging. And there is a big gap in how they have worked or lived their lives before and where you're coming in now. Obviously, with the pandemic and people working from home, it's made it all the more difficult because you can't go up to somebody who's struggling and say, hey man, I noticed you did this, or you're failing in this metric, or maybe failing in this metric is not the best, but I see you could improve this metric. Like, what can I do to help you? Like, do you understand the metric? Do you understand how you can improve it? Do you understand why it's important to the company? Or is it just a number for you that's a blur amongst the dashboards of everything else? And that's hard to do now. I can call them up, but it's not the same thing as just popping over and having a coffee with somebody. And we do have certainly a sales enablement team, but typically they get involved in the beginning of the process when the person is hired, and then they do some big trainings ongoing. I live and breathe in the metrics and seeing what metrics are improving performance. And we can tell from a metrics perspective, if I had more time, who is likely to fail before they actually fail, because I see what metrics start to lag, and those tend to be leading indicators for people that are either about to be let go or will themselves quit. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely does. And actually, I want to come back to something you said earlier, which is the complexity that you deal with at your specific organization. Yeah, that's combined with quite an intimate knowledge that we're talking about here, isn't it? It's an intimate knowledge of your rep, intimate knowledge of how they're tracking, for example. And that requires obviously the time, but also a simple view, I guess, of what's going on. So how do you combine the complexity and the time it takes with the intimacy that you clearly talk so well of?
So my team owns pretty much all the metrics and all of the BI reports, and our CEO is a very good, and he came to the business with a bunch of these metrics that we had to implement, and he had used them before. So he uses something called extreme accountability. And if you Google our CEO and his name, there's a Forbes article that explains it perfectly. And it is basically everybody is accountable for his or her book of business and all the metrics that they have associated with it. So in our case, it's I look at the dashboards on a daily basis, partly to extreme accountability, because my team publishes the dashboards, and all the daily, we send out 60 daily emails to people, so they don't actually have to go hunt down the dashboard. It will actually be published in front of them. So whenever I see something that is off, I tend to dig into it. And today's tools in Business Insights or reporting tools really lets you go down deep fast. And so we use Power BI, and all of the new people that we hire on my team have to be very fluent in Excel and Salesforce or Power BI. So they need a sort of Excel plus either Salesforce or Power BI which is what helps us develop all the reporting that we do. And that in turn helps drive revenue across the board. So if I see somebody failing in my metrics, I can quickly drill down and I can talk to their manager Or if it's somebody that I happen to know, and again, this was more likely the case pre-pandemic because I got to know all the people as they were coming in, I might approach that person personally and say, hey, before other people notices this is something I've seen. But now the it's harder for me to do that. I'm not going to call up a random rep that I haven't met before. I'll probably approach the manager and say, hey, something to take a look at here. Let me know if you want me to call them myself or if you handle it or whatever you want to do. But ultimately, to answer your question, it's today's day and age with our dashboards, it's very easy to see if people are lagging behind in certain metrics. And we have weekly business reviews that we publish, and it's a 200 plus slide deck that my team puts together that quickly summarizes the performance of every sales manager across the board and their reps. So we quickly see what's happening in trends and things like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the spirit of this really is the spirit of being proactive,
Yes.
doing something before it goes wrong. Again, this is something famously, Jonas, it's very hard to do. Your metric dashboards sound really effective in doing that. But that's a cultural piece too, right? Like being proactive and forward looking is actually also a culture as much as it is about the data. And I'm really keen to hear how you engendered and how the broader team engendered a culture of proactivity, because it's something lots of folks want to achieve, but it's not always easy to get people thinking in that kind of way in a business, right?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I'm going to go back to saying this. It's every company has a culture themselves, and then people either fit into that culture or they don't. We do run a factory here, and it's very important. And this is very similar to Amazon. Amazon has their 14 leadership principles, and either you fit into that or you don't. They tend to hire for that upfront. Whereas we are in such a growth mode right now, we have them take our salespeople take a test ahead of time, which has been developed with our private equity firm that they have across their portfolio companies to see if the salespeople would be successful within our company or not. And typically, if they fail that test, we're not going to bring them on board. And for the most part, the vast majority, something like 80 or 90% of the people that are successful on the test are successful in our organization as well. But that doesn't mean that they culturally fit. And again, I can't stress enough how the pandemic has changed that. A lot of people love working from home, but you do take a step back from the culture because you get everything in doses and you don't get the camaraderie that you do get from coming into an office. Kaseya is 100% inside sales. So we have roughly 10 sales different pods that basically are broken down by the initial product, like what product did the customer come into us with, and then from there some of those products have multiple pods. Our biggest group, Kluster, has probably 50 salespeople broken down into 8 sales pods, and they sit lined up in their little houses on our floor, and the sales leaders, I mean, the spirit of competition and sales between them, they have their data up on their TV screens so they can look across and see how people are doing. And then maybe after that, around the corner, we have another one of the products, and we got 2 of those pods, so they sit over there. So everybody is like, they hear the energy. We have music playing, and we when there isn't a pandemic, it's easy to foster this culture, or easier to foster this culture, because people feel a sense of belonging. But now, like I said, if people don't want to have music in the background, they don't have it, and you don't get the extra incentive of the person next to you ringing. We have a big gong, and they ring the gong once for every $1,000 sale they have, and you get inspired by hearing that. It sounds cheesy, but all these little tricks are typical inside sales tricks, and they work, and people get pumped up. We have beer and pizza Fridays, and all those things are tougher to do that. So I would say yes, it is all ingrained in the culture, and the culture has been harder to ingrain now. And hopefully, soon in the next couple of months, we'll all go back to the office, and we will be able to instill that culture. And for all the people that we have hired, and we've probably hired over, 25% of our sales force now during the pandemic. This will all be new to them, and I don't. Hopefully, it's not going to be a rude awakening. Hopefully, it's going to be a really fun awakening, and coming to see what our culture is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right. You don't just get the excitement, though. You also get the learning, those tiny moments where you hear a phrase, you hear the tonality someone takes. Really hard to do when we're remote.
That's right.
Perhaps there isn't much we can do about that, but how do we almost democratize the knowledge from our elite performers through to your new starters? You said you have lots of young people in sales.
Yeah.
Whilst we are remote.
Again, it goes back to, in my opinion, I'm numbers oriented, and we can clearly see across the board, and you can cut and dice the data best you want, but you can clearly see how some salespeople are more effective at selling certain products than other products. And like I said, we have a product portfolio of about 25 products, and some of them are more complex than others. We have overlays or sales specialists, and now I'm talking purely on the account management side, but we certainly have sales engineers from the new customer side as well. But from the account management side, we have specialists for each one of these products. But some of the products, the sales reps, especially the ones that have been here over 12 months, they know how to sell them themselves, and they're, some of them are very self-explanatory. Other products, like one of our products is a server-based backup unit, and it can also be cloud-based. That obviously has a lot of technical implications, and is very dependent on what existing platforms they have, what it is going to turn into. So those, you almost always need to have a specialist and potentially a sales engineer coming in and seeing, is this going to work in their environment. But other things like the cloud backup, I mean, we sell that through self-service. You can literally go to our website and buy that. So, but even those, you see some people are more effective at selling than others. And we try and be effective in analyzing who are the best of the best, and try and maybe record some calls, and people who are less effective can shadow those people who are more effective. We try and keep it within the pods again as much as possible, so we're not interfering with the selling from the other teams. And we have certain internal white papers. We have a SharePoint site where you can go in and see. For privacy purposes, we don't tend to necessarily share recordings of calls as much, because we are an inside sales team, but we have people sitting in Canada, we have people in different states, and each state here has a different set of laws governing the recordings, and so we use them for the most part for bigger training purposes, than necessarily to train up one person or two people. But we could definitely have somebody shadow somebody else. And especially if somebody's been here a little bit of a longer period of time and then proven themselves on one product, maybe just not on the other product, we can have sort of a cross collaboration thing. They're saying, hey, person A, you're fantastic at selling this product, and you're lagging behind on this product, and person B is the reverse. Like, you guys should chat or shadow each other's calls.
Okay, so it all comes back to those metrics, those dashboards. We're seeing what's going on in the business, and from that we can take action.
For me, yes, yeah. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, awesome, Jonas. Well, I have a final question for you.
Sure.
If you could ask a room full of the best rev and sales ops people a question, what would you ask them?
For me, one of the super interesting ones, and again, I've been doing this for over a decade, and every company I've worked for has their own leading indicators, their own set of metrics. Some of them obviously have the same metrics, like dials, talk time, emails sent, and how multi-threaded are you, blah, blah, blah. But we have some metrics that are unique to our organization, and they work perfectly with this company, and those are some of the metrics that our CEO brought with him from his previous companies that he worked for, and clearly very successfully, because our private equity firms wanted him specifically for this position. So my question would be, what are the 1, 2, or 3 KPIs or key performance indicators that you guys use that you feel are unique to your companies and are very effective?